Hello iPass developers. In this video, we are going to see how to create REST API in Apache Camel. For this demo, I am going to take this scenario. I have one database. In that database, I have one table. I want to do the database operations to insert record, select records, update records, and delete records. So I want to do these operations via API. So I'm going to create REST API for these 4 operations. So the API client will invoke the API, which is developed and deployed in Apache Camel, and it will interact with the database and do these database operations. Let's see the demo. Let's see first operation, select. For this get example, I created my API called student API, and I configured this method. I'm going to create my REST API. In Camel, we have REST components. So I'm creating REST. Then first I'm going to create for this get method. So I'm creating version 1 API student. This API will produce JSON. So produces application/JSON. Then I want to add the implementation route. So I'm going to create one subroute for this implementation. To I have to call my subroute. So we are creating subroute using direct component. So I'm giving name as select student implementation route. So I created REST config. I have given my endpoint and the method name, which is producing application/JSON as a response. Then I call this implementation flow. I have to create this implementation flow. In the implementation flow, I'm going to give this select query to retrieve the data from database. So for that, so in my implementation flow, I created the query and set that query as a body message. Then I'm calling the database operation using this 2 component. So here I'm using this JDBC component to query the data from the database. After that, I'm giving the data source name. I created data source using Quaker's data source. So this is the configuration. So it will create the connection and it will give the connection. If you want to know more about this DB operation and data source, you can check out our DB operations video. So I call this data source, which will interact with the database using this query and retrieve the data. I want to convert the data into JSON format. So I am applying this Marshal.json, which will convert that Java object into JSON, then logging the body and sending this body as a JSON response. So my get service completed. Let's test and see the output. To run this application, I'm giving maven Quaker's dev. So application getting deployed. So it is showing started the route and giving this endpoint. I'm going to test this using Postman. So I'm going to this Postman and I'm giving this URL as localhost 8080 v1 API student. So I'm getting the response. So I have 23 rows in this table. So I'm getting all these 23 records in the JSON response. In the log also, we can see. So the JSON is printed. So our get API is working. Now I'm going to create post API to insert one student data into the table. So for that, I want to create one more endpoint, which is post method. So I created another endpoint, which is post method, and the same endpoint. This consumes JSON as an input and produce JSON as a response. Here, my implementation flow name is insert student implementation flow. So I'm going to create the implementation flow. So here I have created this implementation flow. In this flow, I'm putting logger to log the payload, which we are sending in request. Then I'm initializing these header variables. ID is a header variable, so which is taking data from my input request. So my input request is JSON, which has a student object. Inside that we have ID. So it is taking the value from this student object and storing into header variable called ID. So in my database, I will explain this. Then I'm creating fname one header variable for first name, then last name, then age, then date of birth, email, phone number. Here I'm setting this body, the insert query. So in this query, we are giving all these variable names as a prepare statement parameters. Here in this prepare statement, we have to, by default, string values are taken by default. If you want to give the integer value, for example, this ID and age, these two columns in database having the data type as integer. So we have to convert that integer. We have to convert that header variables as an integer type. So here, if you see, I converted this ID into integer class and this age also as an integer class. Then I'm calling these two component, giving the JDBC component and giving the data source name. Then use the header as a parameter equal to true. So this use header as parameter true means it will take these header values as a parameter for this prepare statement. Then it will apply, it will execute this query. After that, I am sending the JSON response here. I'm giving status and this value I'm dynamically passing. So this variable created by this JDBC component. After inserting, it will give the number of rows inserted. We will get this as a response. Let's save this. See, application restarted. Here you can see another route started, which is having the post endpoint. Let's test this in Postman. For testing, I have created this request. So I changed the method as post. Then I'm passing this JSON payload. So in this payload, I have student object. Inside that object, I have all these fields. Then let's test. So I got the response, one record inserted successfully. To test this record inserted successfully, I'm going to the Postgres database. I'm executing this query. Collect star from student. So here we can see row number 24. Dinesh Kumar, this record inserted successfully. Now I'm going to update the same record via this REST API. For that, I'm creating another endpoint. So now I created the same endpoint with the put method. For this also, I'm sending JSON as a request, and it will give the response also in JSON format. This is my implementation flow. So I'm creating the implementation flow similar to this insert implementation, but this is for update operation. So in this implementation flow, I'm getting this body. Same way I'm initializing all these header variables. Here instead of insert query, I'm using this update query. So here I'm setting this update query. For each column, I'm taking this value from the header update, where ID is equal to the given ID. Then I'm using this JDBC component, data source, then use header as parameter equal to true. Then I'm responding, then I'm giving the response in JSON format. Here it will give number of rows updated. Let's save this and test. I save this application. So application is restarted. Now the put endpoint also added. Going to this postman. So here I'm going to change this method to put. So it shows one record updated, but I have not changed anything here. I'm going to change this age as 25. Then phone number, I'm updating some value. It updated one row. I'm going to this table now. Currently this age is 23 and phone number ends with 123. Now if you see age is updated as 25 and phone number updated as triple zeros. So we created get post put. Now I'm going to add for delete operation. For that I have to add this delete method and endpoint. So I created method as delete, then endpoint is this. For delete operation, we need to get this ID. So I'm adding this ID as URI parameter. Then this API also produce JSON response. Then this is my implementation flow. I need to create the implementation. So this is my implementation flow. So here I log the headers. Then I'm converting this ID into integer because the query parameter, because this URI parameter is passed in header. So we are getting that value in header. While running, I will show in the log section. After that, I'm setting this query delete from student where ID is equal to the given ID. Then the same format, data JDBC component and data source and use header as parameters true. After that, it will give the response with deleted count. Save this application. Application is getting restarted. Now you can see the fourth route also added with the delete operation. Now going to this postman. Here we can change this method as delete. Then 24 is ID. I can create new request. So it is showing one record deleted successfully. If I go to this log, here we can see this header. I log this header. So in this header, we can see ID, this URI parameter passed as a header variable. So I'm using that header variable and converting into this integer class. Then I am using that header in my purpose statement. Now we created our student API with 4 methods and 4 operation with the database. So our REST API is created. We want to give this API documentation. So what are the endpoint? What are the method for each endpoint? So we need to generate this documentation. So we call it as Open API spec. How to generate that Open API spec for our REST API? For that, we have to use 2 dependencies. For this REST API, we have to use this dependency. And to generate this Open API spec, we have to use this Camel Quarkus REST Open API and Camel Open API Java. These 2 dependencies we have to add. I have added. Then we have to add the REST configuration in our DSL. So this is my REST configuration. So here I am adding this component platform HTTP, then giving the context path and API context path as API doc. Then I'm giving this API title as student API, then version for this API, then properties true, then the Open API version to generate that Open API spec. So I added this REST configuration, then save this file. So application restarted. Here we can see one more endpoint added. This is API documentation. So if I go to browser and execute this URL, HTTP localhost API doc, then I will get this Open API spec file. So here we can see the endpoint and the method and what are the parameter name, and it is mandatory. We can use this Open API spec for creating API in API manager or API gateways. We can load this in Swagger editor and generate the Open API in YAML format as well. So that's all about this video. We have seen how to create REST API to perform database operations in Apache Camel. And we are using that Open API spec JSON in Swagger editor. You can see the API details and what are the methods and what are the endpoints. Thank you for watching this video. Provide your likes, comments, and share this video with your friends. For more videos, subscribe our channel. Thank you.